visited all 5 Sunday morning talk shows. And what he tried to do there was to defend the Obama administration's handling of the various scandals that we are all too familiar with. Unfortunately for the president, I think he only made things worse. For example, he said that President Obama's whereabouts on the night of the Benghazi terrorist attack were irrelevant. It's a strange use of the word. Where the president is when a terrorist attack kills 4 American citizens in Libya, to call that irrelevant strikes me as an odd choice of words. He was also asked whether it is illegal for the IRS to target individuals and organizations for political reasons. Again, he said, and I quote, "It's irrelevant." Strange choice of words. In other words, if the American people were hoping that this White House would finally provide straight answers to basic questions, they were once again disappointed. Let's review the facts, starting with Benghazi, as the senator from Nebraska was just talking about. 8 months, of course, have now passed since 4 brave Americans were killed by terrorists linked to al-Qaeda. 8 months have passed since the Obama administration blamed the attack on a spontaneous demonstration incited by some amateur YouTube video. Is it as irrelevant that we don't know where the President of the United States was on the night of the attack, or what he did or did not do to come to the aid of these 4 brave Americans who were at risk of losing their life and did in fact lose their lives? Is it irrelevant that members of the Obama administration deliberately misled time and time again the American people about this act of terrorism? Is it irrelevant that Ambassador Susan Rice was blaming the massacre on a YouTube video the very same day that Libya's president was calling it a pre-planned terrorist attack? Is it irrelevant that the former deputy to the late Ambassador Chris Stevens has said that everybody at the U.S. Embassy believed from the start that it was a terrorist attack? And finally, is it irrelevant that this former deputy, Gregory Hicks, was punished by the State Department for cooperating with congressional investigators so the truth could get out? Strange choice of words, irrelevant. I don't think the American people believe that is irrelevant, any of these facts. In fact, I think what we can only conclude is that the culture at the White House, unfortunately, has created is one where cover-ups, misdirection, prevarication, dissembling are okay. Not being straight with the American people. No wonder the American people doubt their leadership in Washington, and particularly in the White House. If the White House is going to create a culture in which these sort of cover-ups are okay, or in the word of Dan Pfeiffer, simply irrelevant. When the American people can't trust the White House to be honest with them and refuses to accept responsibility for their mistakes, it is not irrelevant. As for the IRS scandal, some people have tried to dismiss the targeting of various conservative groups as a rogue operation managed by a few renegade staffers in the Cincinnati office. Yet the more we learn about the scandal, the bigger it seems. Now, anybody who's been around a big bureaucracy, and certainly the IRS qualifies as a big bureaucracy, knows that the easiest answer when you ask the bureaucrat something, the easiest answer is no, because they don't get in trouble for saying no. They may not be very helpful or responsive, but they don't get in trouble. What strikes me as so bizarre about this idea that there are a number of free agents in Cincinnati who decided to cook this up on their own is it really goes against the grain of everything we know about bureaucracies. Because why in the world would they take the initiative to target political speech unless they thought they either had the explicit or the implicit approval of their higher-ups? It just doesn't make any sense otherwise. Just last week, one Cincinnati IRS employee told the Washington Post, and I think this has the ring of truth, this Cincinnati IRS employee said, everything comes from the top. We don't have any authority to make these decisions without someone signing off on them. There has to be a directive. Now that sounds like the bureaucracy that I know and am familiar with. So I'd like to ask the White House, is it irrelevant that America's tax collection agency was turned into some political attack machine, deciding that they were the ones who could police political speech and activity protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution? Is it irrelevant that an agency with the power to destroy people's lives adopted the tactics of a dictator? Is it irrelevant that senior IRS officials learned about these abuses at least 2 years ago and lied to Congress and the American people when we asked them about them? When I got reports from the King Street Patriots and True the Vote in Houston, Texas, and the Waco and San Antonio Tea Parties in 2011-2012 about some of the tactics they were being exposed to, I and other members of the Senate wrote to the Commissioner of the IRS, Mr. Schulman, and Mr. Miller, the acting commissioner, and asked them about them, and they failed to disclose what we now know is the truth. Senator Hatch, the distinguished ranking member of the Finance Committee, yesterday told Mr. Miller that was a lie by omission at the very least. Certainly it was not telling the whole truth to the members of Congress whose responsibility is to provide oversight for the American people of the IRS and of the federal government. So I don't think it's irrelevant when IRS Commissioner Douglas Schulman categorically denied these abuses in sworn testimony before the House Ways and Means Committee in March of 2012. And furthermore, I don't think it's irrelevant that IRS officials may have committed criminal offenses. Now, I realize that's a serious statement and charge to make, but we know this morning that the director of the Internal Revenue Service division overseeing nonprofit organizations has taken the Fifth Amendment when asked for sworn testimony by a Congressional Oversight Committee. Now, just to refresh everyone's memory, the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution means that you cannot be compelled to incriminate yourself and possibly expose yourself by virtue of your own testimony to a criminal prosecution. That's what taking the Fifth Amendment is. And while she is within her rights to take the Fifth Amendment, if she has a credible fear of prosecution for violating the criminal laws, this, I believe, elevates this scandal to a new level. Finally, I would suggest to our friends at the White House that it is not irrelevant that a Texas businesswoman named Catherine Engelbrecht was targeted not only by the IRS, but by the FBI, the ATF, and OSHA after she founded a pair of organizations in Houston, Texas, known as the King Street Patriots and True the Vote. I think most Americans would agree that all of this information is quite relevant, quite reprehensible, and something that Congress ought to, on a bipartisan basis, investigate. Now, I have to congratulate the chairman of the Senate Finance Committees, Max Baucus, a Democrat, not a member of my political party, and Senator Orrin Hatch, the ranking Republican on the Finance Committee, for the bipartisan way that they have begun the investigation into this IRS scandal. Because we all recognize, Republicans and Democrats alike, that this is a threat to the public's trust in its government's institutions, and that this culture of intimidation is not something we can stand for. using the extraordinary power of the federal government to target American citizens for exercising their constitutional rights. Indeed, if President Obama wants to know why the American people's trust in the federal government has plummeted to an all-time low, all he has to do is to look at these two scandals and to consider how the administration is handling them. When government officials consistently mislead, stonewall, and abuse their power, people take notice, and they don't forget. And the day of reckoning will surely come. Madam President, I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
General speeches this morning in the Senate as senators continue in morning business. During opening remarks today from majority and minority leaders, they talked about bipartisanship and collegiality in the Senate as it relates to some of President Obama's judicial nominees. Majority Leader Reid submitting that the nominees have faced unneeded delays employed by Republicans in reaching confirmation. And Minority Leader Mitch McConnell objected, saying that the majority of the president's nominees have eventually been confirmed. And all this as Majority Leader Reid yesterday filed a cloture motion on the nomination of Sri Srinivasan to be a U.S. District Judge for the D.C. Circuit. Cloture votes expected to occur tomorrow. If cloture is invoked, it means if 60 votes are achieved, then a final confirmation vote is more than likely to occur after the Memorial Day break. The priority still in the Senate today, as they work toward the Memorial Day break this weekend, continues to be the Farm Bill, setting agriculture, food, stamp, and nutrition programs for the next 5 years. A number of amendments are pending, and work is expected to continue through this week. Debate on the Farm Bill expected to get underway, and that should happen any moment now here on C-SPAN 2. At 11:15, we are expecting the maiden speech by Wisconsin Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin. And then at 4 Eastern today, senators will start on a resolution dealing with Iran sanctions over the country's nuclear program and expressing support for Israel. A vote on that measure is planned for 5 p.m. As we wait for further remarks on the Senate floor, Treasury Secretary Jack Lewis testifying today before the House Financial Services Committee about the ongoing implementation of the Dodd-Frank financial regulations law.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you. And it's my understanding that I have 10 minutes to speak. Can you confirm if that's correct?
The senator is correct.
Okay. Thank you. I am here today to speak to the importance of bringing much-needed reform to the federal sugar program. I understand that this is not something that the presiding officer supports, and that this is not something that the Agriculture Committee addressed in the Farm Bill. But I think it's important to try and address some of the misinformation that's out there. We've been hearing a lot of talk about the need to protect America's sugar farmers. But what we haven't heard is that sugar remains the most tightly controlled commodity market in this country. We currently have an outdated, what I believe is an outdated program that offers a sweet deal to a small group of sugar growers and processors at the expense of too many other American businesses and at the expense of American consumers. What the amendment that I have offered with a number of co-sponsors will do is reform the sugar program to make U.S. manufacturers more competitive and to reduce prices for consumers. It will lower sugar price support levels, and it will reform the excessive restrictions on domestic supply and import quotas for sugars. These reforms would save taxpayers money. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that this legislation would save $82 million over the next 10 years. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind that the amendment that we've introduced does not eliminate the safety net for sugar producers. It simply makes some moderate, common-sense reforms in the program. Sugar growers would still be supported by the Sugar Loan Program and protected by import restrictions and domestic marketing allotments. In fact, this amendment simply returns us to the same policies that sugar producers themselves supported as recently as 2007. Since 2008, sugar prices in the United States have soared to record highs, and they've consistently reached levels that are about twice the world price of sugar. In fact, the sugar program has cost consumers and businesses as much as $14 billion over the last 4 years. This amendment would provide a smart, practical, and pragmatic fix to the policies that are currently in place. And it's a bipartisan proposal. There are 18 other senators from both sides of the aisle who have joined on this amendment. Now, again, we've been hearing about jobs that would be lost in the sugar industry if we make these moderate reforms. But the reality is we're already losing and have lost too many valuable manufacturing jobs across this country as businesses close or move overseas in search of lower prices. And we can see some of this illustrated on this chart. These are sugar-using jobs in the food industry, and there are more than 30 times as many of these jobs than there are in sugar production and processing. So we can see sugar-using food and beverage jobs, that's this blue, compared to sugar farming, production, and processing, the red. So 590,669 compared to 18,078. And where do these numbers come from? Well, in fact, they're from the U.S. Census and the Department of Commerce. Unfortunately, between 1997 and 2011, nearly 127,000 of these jobs, the manufacturing jobs, were lost in sugar-using industries. In fact, the U.S. Department of Commerce has estimated that for every one sugar-growing job that is saved through high sugar prices, that approximately 3 manufacturing jobs are lost. So, again, let me put the numbers into perspective, as it does as this chart does. There are less than 5,000 sugar growers and processors in the country. U.S. data shows there are about 18,000 total jobs in the industry, sugar industry, compared with almost 600,000 jobs in the sugar-using industry. Now, we've also been hearing that this amendment would allow for an increase in foreign sugar into the U.S. market. This amendment maintains the current import quotas for each country. So let me repeat that again. It maintains the current import quotas for each country. It allows the Secretary of Agriculture to modify these quotas if he or she determines that it's necessary, just as they were able to do before 2008. And the fact is this amendment would have no impact on sugar imports from Mexico, because under the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, Mexico currently is the only country without a quota for sugar importation. And that's true whether we pass this amendment or not. That's true under the current system. So even if we don't pass reforms, the argument that Mexico is coming in and bringing sugar into the country is true. There is sugar coming in from Mexico, but the fact is that's the way it is under the current program. And currently sugar is the only, let me repeat, the only commodity program that was not reformed in the committee-passed Farm Bill that is under consideration now. And let me just be clear. I think the Agriculture Committee and Senator Stabenow and the committee did a great job on that bill in most areas because they provided savings, they reformed the program, and so it's particularly puzzling to me that they totally left the sugar subsidies out of the bill, that they did nothing to reform the sugar program. I don't think any program that the federal government operates should be immune from updates and improvements. We need to act. We need to act now to reform the sugar program and to protect those workers who are in the food industry that use sugar and protect consumers who are spending more money than they should be for the cost of sugar. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield the floor.
Madam Chair.
Senator from Colorado.
Madam Chair, I would like to ask unanimous consent to engage in a colloquy with my good friend, Senator Collins of Maine, for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Madam President, I should say, Senator Collins and I are here today to underscore the timeliness of a bipartisan solution that we've been pushing for since March. While I firmly believe we should replace the sequester with a balanced and comprehensive plan that delivers the same deficit-reducing punch, it appears to me and to all of us that the sequester is here to stay for at least this year, for the remainder of the fiscal year. We run on a September 30 fiscal year. And I want to underline, we need deficit reduction. But the way in which we're doing it through the sequester is terrible policy, and it's time to fix it. Just after the fiscal year 13 sequester was triggered, with Senator Collins' leadership, she and I introduced a common-sense plan that would empower federal departments and agencies to replace the indiscriminate cuts of sequestration with more strategic cuts. You just have to look at the way in which sequestration has endangered critical programs for working families, our senior citizens, and the middle class to know that we have to do more than we're doing today. And just throwing up our hands and doing nothing is poor governing. Senator Collins and I believe that we have a responsibility here as leaders to inject some measure of common sense into the process. And with that, Madam President, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Senator Collins, for her thoughts on the necessity of the Collins-Udall legislative proposal.
Madam President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, of course, my friend and colleague from Colorado is exactly right. And I want to thank him for his leadership on this issue and for working with me to develop a bipartisan, common-sense plan that would help to mitigate the harmful effects of the automatic spending cuts known as sequestration that took effect on March 1st. I want to emphasize that under our proposal, budget targets would still have to be met. We understand the need to confront our enormous federal debt, which is approaching $17 trillion. But our plan does so in a sensible way. It recognizes that rather than imposing meat-axe cuts, we should be setting priorities. Our bill would give the heads of federal agencies and departments affected by sequestration the flexibility to implement the required cuts in a much more thoughtful way by preserving vital programs and reducing or eliminating lower priority programs. Our bill also ensures appropriate congressional oversight of these decisions by requiring the agency heads to submit their spending plans to both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees 5 days before implementing these decisions. These committees and their subcommittees know the budgets of these agencies inside and out and will be able to effectively monitor their spending decisions just as the committees now oversee reprogramming requests. Madam President, Congress has already demonstrated that providing flexibility to federal agencies in a common-sense way to address the unprecedented problems caused by sequestration makes a great deal of sense. Just recently, Congress passed a bill that we authored that gave the Department of Transportation the flexibility to end the furloughs of air traffic controllers and to instead reduce spending by transferring unused balances from a grant program. That's the kind of decision-making flexibility that we're talking about. In this case, the furloughs were causing terrible flight delays and had the potential to truly harm the economies of Maine, Colorado, and countless other states that count on tourists visiting to see our amazing scenery, to sample our extraordinary food, and to just be with our great people. Had we not come together to pass this bill, the impacts could have been devastating to Maine and to Colorado businesses and their employees. In Maine, it would have affected everyone from our wait staff and our innkeepers to the countless tourist attractions in our state. It would have even affected federal institutions like the gem of Acadia National Park and our state parks as well. In our states, each season, but particularly during those key peak summer months, we welcome with open arms visitors from around the globe. But if those visitors were going to have to sit on a tarmac for 3 hours awaiting a flight, they most likely were going to cancel their trips. I'm proud of the work that Senator Udall and I did to pass this bipartisan bill, but more can and should be done to give other agencies the same kind of flexibility to set wise spending priorities. And I would turn to the senator from Colorado to ask him if he agrees that isn't that a better approach than just across-the-board cuts with no flexibility.
The senator from Maine has it exactly right, and I want to commend her for her leadership, Madam President. I want to point out, too, to those who were critical of what we did when it came to the FAA, that it's not just elite business travelers or members of Congress that use our air transportation system. It's families, it's seniors, it is businesswomen. It's every American possible using our air transportation system. You see the egalitarian nature of our air transportation system when you're in our airports. And she brokered a sensible compromise, kept our airports running, flights on time, and commerce flowing smoothly. And I remember Senator Collins standing here on the floor somewhat late at night and appealing to the leader, both of our leaders, and Senator Collins led the way. We also moved to end the furloughs for meat inspectors. If we can deal with these small corners of sequestration, we can go all in. We've proven we can find consensus. It's time to finish that job. And I want to turn back to my colleague for any final thoughts she might have to make about our bill and the importance of this effort we have underway.
Well, I want to thank my good friend and colleague. It wouldn't have happened without his support. We took a bipartisan approach, and that's the kind of approach that we're taking today and urging our colleagues to look at our bill and our leaders to move it. Many agencies face the same challenges that were encountered by the FAA, and many agencies know of better ways to meet the sequestration targets. I have long believed that these across-the-board cuts, where we don't prioritize, simply do not make sense. Last week, the Department of Defense announced that because the Navy was able to identify cost-effective ways to meet its budget targets, thousands of hardworking men and women at our nation's naval shipyards, like the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine, would not have to be furloughed. I had long argued that the Department of Defense has the flexibility to minimize the furloughs because we gave them that authority as part of the continuing resolution. I would be remiss if I did not note, however, my disappointment that some of the workers at the shipyard and others, like those in the National Guard and at other facilities, such as the Defense Accounting Services Center in Limestone, Maine, still face furloughs. There are other important programs as well. Biomedical researchers, school superintendents are also in a quandary of having little or no flexibility to implement the sequestration targets. Now, instead of enacting piecemeal fixes, whether it's the FAA or it's the meat inspectors, our bill would empower administrators to head off this problem and avoid indiscriminate spending cuts. We can mitigate the harmful effects of sequestration, protect jobs, and avoid mindless spending cuts while tackling the very real problem of excessive and unnecessary spending by simply allowing managers to distinguish between vital programs, to be creative, and to cut those that are of lesser importance. I know that my colleague from Colorado would agree that no business facing the need to cut expenses would ever treat every program and function and service of that business as if they were of equal worth. Instead, the business managers and executives and employees would evaluate all the programs and set priorities. And that's all we're asking here. So I would like to thank the senator from Colorado, my good friend Senator Udall, for his strong partnership on our effort to protect the jobs of hardworking Americans, prevent arbitrary spending cuts, and yet deal with an unsustainable $16.8 trillion debt. We know that our approach would go a long way toward allowing priorities to be set. And after all, Madam President, if we're not going to set priorities and make the tough decisions and distinguish among absolutely vital programs and those that could be cut or eliminated, then we might as well go home and just have a computer apply a formula to the budget. But that's not what we're here, and that is not what the American people expect. They expect us to exercise judgment and make good decisions.
Madam President, I believe our time has expired, but or is beginning to expire, but I wanted to just underline what Senator Collins said. We are passionate about this. Some say a passionate problem solver is an oxymoron, or a passionate moderate is an oxymoron. That isn't the case here. We want to solve this. We both have private sector experience. This is not how you would run a concern in the private sector. We can do this. We've shown we can do this. Let's move forward and provide certainty, not just to the federal agencies, the people of this country, and in a time of tough economic challenges with a fragile recovery underway, we need to create more certainty, and we need to budget and then execute in a wiser, smarter way. I want to thank the Senator from Maine for her leadership. I value our partnership, and I know we're going to see this to a successful conclusion. Madam President, I did have a unanimous consent request before I relinquish the floor. I have 10 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I would therefore ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Maine.
Madam President, could the President inform me of whether or not there's an order to proceed right now, or whether there's some additional time for morning business?
There is 4 minutes remaining for majority in morning business.
Thank you, Madam President.
President?
Senator from Colorado.
Could I ask unanimous consent that Senator from Maine be recognized for 4 minutes?
Without objection.
Madam President, and I understand that Senator Baldwin is on the way to make her maiden speech, and I promise that I will stop talking the moment that she enters the chamber, and I thank my colleague from Colorado. Madam President, later today the Senate will vote on a resolution that has been introduced by Senators Menendez and Graham, and I'm very pleased to join my Senate colleagues in co-sponsoring this resolution, which reaffirms our commitment to a strong U.S.-Israeli relationship and to preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. At this time in our history, it is more important than ever before that we demonstrate a firm commitment to our allies, even if the neighborhood in which they exist appears to be more of a tinderbox than it has been in decades. This resolution reaffirms that the United States will be a reliable friend and a determined ally, even in dangerous times, indeed especially in dangerous times. We are at a critical juncture in our efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons capability. And during my time in the Senate, I've repeatedly supported and indeed authored legislation that would impose sanctions on Iran and put pressure on the regime to change course. This resolution that we'll vote on later today goes further. It makes very clear that the United States will stand by Israel if Israel feels that the state needs to take action to protect its very existence. Madam President, I see that the senator has now arrived, so I would ask unanimous consent that the balance of my remarks be entered into the record as if read. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Madam President,
The senator from Wisconsin.
I ask unanimous consent to speak in morning business for as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
As I make my first remarks on the Senate floor, I have the honor of occupying the same Senate seat, and in fact occupying the very Senate desk once used by Senator Robert M. La Follette, Sr. Fighting Bob La Follette, as he was known, was a Republican senator from Wisconsin a century ago. He is credited as the founder of the Progressive Party and progressive movement in this nation. And I admire Fighting Bob's legacy in many ways. But I want to assure my colleagues who are present in the chamber at this moment that I will not emulate his maiden speech, which went on for 3 successive days. Bob La Follette ran for this office because he was concerned that while corporate interests were being well served in Washington, ordinary people weren't even being heard. He traveled all around the state of Wisconsin, literally speaking from makeshift stages of soapboxes and hay wagons at county fairs. And his message came to define my state's progressive tradition. The things he talked about in that day still ring true today. As I've traveled the state, Wisconsinites have told me that powerful and well-connected seem to still write their own rules, while the concerns and struggles of middle-class families go unnoticed here in Washington. They feel like our economic system is tilted towards those at the top, and that our political system exists to protect those unfair advantages instead of to make sure that everybody gets a fair shot. They see Washington happy to let Wall Street write their own rules, but unable to help students pull themselves out of debt. They see Washington working to protect big tax breaks for powerful corporations, but unwilling to protect small manufacturers getting ripped off by China's cheating. They see Washington bouncing from one manufactured fiscal crisis to the next, but never addressing the real and ongoing crisis of our disappearing middle class. The truth is that while you hear a lot about the wide distance between Democrats and Republicans, the widest and most important distance in our political system is between the content of the debate here in Washington and the concerns of hard-working people in places like Wisconsin. That distance parallels the large and growing gaps between rich and poor, between rising costs and stagnant incomes, between our nation and our competitors when it comes to education and innovation. And it's really hurting people. When my grandparents were raising me, I learned that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you can get ahead. The Wisconsinites I talked to grew up learning that very same thing. They're working as hard as ever to get ahead. But many are finding that they're hardly getting by. People are still working for that middle-class dream, a job that pays the bills, health coverage you can rely on, a home that you can call your own, a chance to save for your kids' college education, and a secure retirement. But instead, too many are finding that even 2 jobs aren't enough to make ends meet, and those jobs are hard to find and hard to keep. They're finding that the homes they work so hard to own aren't even worth what still remains on their mortgage. They're finding that the cost of college is going up, and they're worried that they might never be able to retire comfortably. That's the biggest gap of all, the gap between the economic security Wisconsinites work so hard to achieve and the economic uncertainty that they are asked to settle for. And if we can't close that gap, we might someday talk about the middle class as something we used to have, not something that each generation can aspire to. We all get it. We all see this happening. And while Wisconsinites don't agree about what we should do, they want to see us working together to find solutions, even if it takes some spirited debate. But when they look across that yawning divide to Washington, they see us advancing talking points and playing politics instead of putting our varying experiences and talents to work solving these problems. But I'm optimistic. I didn't run for the Senate just because I agree with those complaints. I ran for the Senate because I think we can do better. And I know that I have a great example to follow in the people of Wisconsin. You know, these are particularly tough times for my state. Even as the national economy is rebounding and businesses in Wisconsin and middle-class families in my state really remain stuck in neutral. The manufacturing sector that sustained our prosperity for generations has taken a lot of hits, some that could have been prevented, and others that are simply a factor of our changing economy and our changing world. But you don't see Wisconsin workers and business owners wallowing in crisis or looking for someone to blame. Our state motto is one word: forward. And that's the only thing we know. In the short time that I've been here, I've made it my mission to fight to make sure that Wisconsinites have the tools and skills that they need to succeed in a made-in-Wisconsin economy that revitalizes our manufacturing sector and rebuilds our prosperity. And that means respecting labor. It means investing in regional hubs of collaborative research and development, supporting the technical colleges that are working to provide a skilled workforce, and encouraging public and private partnerships to revitalize our manufacturing sector. But it all relies on the talent of individuals who are working hard to help our communities move forward. Years ago, John Miller, a disabled Marine Corps veteran who lives near Milwaukee, invented a new kind of motorcycle windshield that uses LED lights embedded in acrylic. For years, he's been working hard to find investors and bring his ideas to market. He's been testing different acrylics, showing off his work at trade shows, spending months trying to get approvals from the Department of Transportation. Now, investors are lining up at John's door. Harley-Davidson even wanted to buy his patent. But he doesn't want to just make a profit. He wants to make a difference. So he's holding out until he knows that everything in his product will be made and manufactured in the United States, hopefully by other disabled veterans who often have a hard time finding work when they come home. Wisconsin is full of John Millers, ordinary people with ingenuity, with the determination and the civic spirit to become not just successful, but engines of economic opportunity for their whole communities, committed to the common good. I am so proud of all the remarkable potential I've seen in Wisconsin. The Global Water Center in Milwaukee, which will open this summer as an incubator for water technology businesses. The partnership of Johnson Controls and UW-Milwaukee for an Innovation Campus Research Park in Wauwatosa. The advances in energy efficiency technology being realized at Orion Energy in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The work on sustainable biofuels at the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center in Madison. and small business incubators at technical colleges across our state, helping to build the dreams of entrepreneurs. But these stories of innovation and cooperation, these exciting opportunities to build an economy made to last, these are happening all over our country. And I'm going to let people in on a little secret. We here in the Senate can be innovative too. We can cooperate. We can get excited by these opportunities. It's true of Democrats and Republicans alike, because none of us came here just to audition for cable news or to win our next election before the bumper stickers from the last one even come off the cars. I've already had the great joy of working with colleagues from both parties, and I know that neither party has a monopoly on compassion or common sense. There's nothing liberal or conservative about wanting to help our manufacturers compete and win on the world stage. There's not a senator in this body whose heart hasn't broken when listening to a constituent who just can't seem to get ahead. We can't fix all those gaps in our economy with one bill. And not even fighting Bob La Follette could close that divide in our political system with one speech. But I'm using this speech, my first here on the Senate floor, to say that I'm ready to work hard and work with anyone to make progress on these challenges and help move this great country forward. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Madam President. That's okay. First, before the senator from Wisconsin leaves the floor, I just want to indicate how thrilled I am to have another Great Lakes senator with us in the United States Senate. And Senator Baldwin is an invaluable member of the Budget Committee. She's fighting hard for Wisconsin agriculture, and now in the middle of the efforts on the Farm Bill, I know she's deeply involved and concerned about our men and women who provide the food that we put on our tables every day. And so we just want to thank you for your leadership. We're just so pleased to have you in the United States Senate.
Senator from Oklahoma. Okay. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-954, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 73, S-954, a bill to reauthorize agricultural programs through 2018.
Oh, Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, we're going to have a vote coming up in, in about 20 minutes. And it's a vote on my amendment to the Farm Bill or the Ag Bill, however we want to refer it. I'm sorry? I'm sorry. I call up Senate Amendment number 960 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Is there an objection to setting aside the pending amendment? Without objection. Clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Inhofe, from supplementary amendment number 960.
All right.
To my distinguished colleague from Oklahoma, if I might just ask before he proceeds on his amendment, if I could enter a unanimous consent about the vote.
Oh, yes. No objection.
Thank you very much. I would ask unanimous consent that at 12 noon today the Senate proceed to vote in relation to the Inhofe Amendment 960, that the time until noon be equally divided between Senators Inhofe and Stabenow or their designees. Further, that no second-degree amendment be in order to the amendment prior to the vote.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Okay, and I thank the gentlelady, and we will be prepared to vote on an amendment at noon today. I think it's in accordance. It's kind of interesting. When I go back to Oklahoma, where I know this is offensive to some people, back where normal people are, I was giving a speech. I say to the gentlelady who's managing this bill, it was in Duncan, Oklahoma, Ironically, it was Duncan, Oklahoma, where they had the first hydraulic fracturing back in 1949. So I was there talking to them. This is Democrats and Republicans. And when I tell them that and they ask about the Farm Bill, I said, what Farm Bill? Because 80% of the Farm Bill is not a farm bill, it's a welfare bill. We're talking about the food stamp programs. This is a shocker to people. They don't understand this. Why would they call this a farm bill if 80% of it is talking about the food stamp program? $800 billion over 10 years. Now, in the first 5 years, enrollment of the food stamp program has grown by 70%. I'd say this, Madam President, it's gone from 28 million families to 47 million families. That's almost doubling in a period of 4 years. Now, I know there are a lot of people, I don't say this critically of, there are some people who are very liberal who feel that government should have a greater involvement in our lives, and certainly that's what this system is all about, to kind of weigh these things and see. I can't think of anyone who could rationally say that this program of food stamps could justify being increased by 100% in a period of 4 years. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the many years ago when most of us had gone through elementary school. And at that time, we heard about Alexis de Tocqueville, a guy that came to this country, and looking at the wealth of America in the last paragraph of the last chapter. Says, once the people of this country finally vote themselves money out of the public trust, the system will fail. And what he talked about there was it gets to the point where 50% of the people are on the receiving end of government. Now, I know that we all remember that, and maybe a lot of people think that times have changed, but you have to stop somewhere. And this amendment, I think, is the most important amendment on the Farm Bill, because it actually turns this into a farm bill. And I would think people who are concerned with agriculture, as I am, Oklahoma, my state of Oklahoma is a big ag state, and it's one that I'm very concerned about agriculture. But I can't find anyone in my state who says this should be a part of a program that would be a charity bill that could be voted on its own merits, not throwing it in with the farm bill. So over the same time period, in the last 4 years, this has grown. It has increased by 100% from the cost being $37 billion to $75 billion. That's a 100% increase in one program. Now, enrollment in the program has even increased at an unemployment rate as it's declined. In 2010, when the average unemployment rate was 9.6% across the country, enrollment was 40.3 million people or families. In 2012, when the unemployment rate was 8%, which is 1.5% lower than it was in 2010, enrollment had increased by 46 million people. Unfortunately, the Farm Bill was written only makes a 4% cut in the program over 10 years, which is a cut of less than 0.5%. So I think those who say, well, wait a minute, we are cutting that program, when you cut it by 0.5%, that's not really a cut. So the amendment is very straightforward, very simple. It says it converts the program into a block grant so that the states will have all authority needed to ensure the program prevents the impoverished from going hungry. The funding provided is sufficient to provide benefits to the same number of participants that we were enrolled in the mid-2000s. Money would be divided among the states proportionally based on the number of individuals who are living under the federal poverty line. So it would have to be fair. It's not going to go according to population, not according to size, not according to wealth, but those living under the poverty line. The new program would give states the ability to keep the money that they receive for 5 years so that they can build flexibility into their programs, allowing their programs to shrink and grow as the economy changes. After 5 years, after 5 years, any unused money would return to the Treasury for deficit reduction. Now, while the amendment is careful to give states maximum control over the design and implementation of their own programs, which is what we want to happen, it does require them to include work requirements, mandatory drug testing, and verification of citizenship prior to qualifying anyone to participate in the program. You go out in the street of any of the towns, of any of the states in this country. And you ask the program, is it unreasonable to require people to have work requirements? Certainly, the last time when President Clinton was in office, we enacted some major reforms that included work requirements, and most of the Democrats were very supportive of that. It does, and people should not be concerned about mandatory drug testing and verification of citizenship. Certainly, the citizenship thing is something we hear quite often. Further, states would not be allowed to authorize users to purchase things like alcohol, tobacco, dog food, and things like that. In total, I expect this amendment to save some $300 billion over 10 years relative to the current funding baseline. Now, I feel very strongly about this. And this is one of those issues that people are talking about all over the country. I know when my wife comes back and she talks about people who are there perfectly capable of working, coming up and buying things like beer and all this, using food stamps, this is something that offends Democrats, Republicans, and liberals and conservatives alike throughout America. So that amendment is going to be coming up at noon, 15 minutes from now, and I encourage my colleagues to vote for this amendment and turn the Farm Bill into a farm bill instead of a charity bill. With that, I will yield the floor, but if no one else wants to speak, I want to make one comment about what's happening in Oklahoma. I came back yesterday from my state of Oklahoma. We've all seen on the media the disaster, the heart-wrenching things that are happening in Moore, Oklahoma. I remember so well, 14 years ago in 1999, another tornado came through. If you look at it, it's on the same path as this tornado that came through 2 days ago. And it was just about the same devastation. And I stood there and I looked at and recalled what I saw in 1999. I have to tell you, Madam President, it was one that just breaks your heart. When you see these people, they were trying to match up missing parents with missing kids. Now think about that. We had it with 2 schools, but one of them, they felt at one time all the kids would have been killed in there. When you look at the rubbish, you can't imagine anyone could have survived. And yet some did survive. And the early reports of the deaths were a lot higher, but it doesn't really, the deaths are very important, but that's not the only thing. There are people in the hospitals right now that are trying, one of the hospitals had to evacuate every bed in that hospital when they saw it coming, and it's a miracle not one person, not one of the persons who was in that hospital was killed. No one can understand how that could have happened. But we watched this going on and seeing parents. You know, I've got 20 kids and grandkids, and I just can't imagine what it'd be like to go through something like that. I have to say this, that the federal government, the state government, the county government, the city of Oklahoma City, the city of Moore, and all the private sector have joined in together. I've never seen any effort, including the 1999 effort, that really drew people together like this. We have people that are companies, and there are a lot of people who are builders and developers who have heavy equipment and trucks and things like that, and they're donating that to this cause, to help these people. So I want everyone to pray for these people, for the families, and for us to pull together and make this thing survivable. I know that Oklahoma's in the tornado belt. Everybody reminds me of that all the time, and it's true. I can remember it being involved and close, and either there at the time or right after almost every tornado in the last 25 or 30 years. Little town of Pitcher, Oklahoma, a tiny tornado, but it wiped out everything. And that's the thing that's characteristic about tornadoes. No one survives. With one exception, they're now talking about maybe accelerating the number of safe rooms and tornado shelters. This is a program that started in 1999, and I can't tell you, we're trying to evaluate right now how many people in Moore, Oklahoma are alive today because they actually took advantage of that program, and I can assure you that many more will. Now, I don't want to hog the time. There are others who want to talk on this bill, but I just want to say that we in Oklahoma appreciate the love and the help from all government levels as well as private sector levels, and ask sincerely for the prayers of everyone within earshot of me right now. I'll yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam President. Before speaking on the amendment, I want to share, as I know everyone in the Senate wants to share their thoughts and prayers with the people of Oklahoma. As the distinguished senator from Oklahoma knows, I have a strong connection with Oklahoma. My mom grew up on a farm in picking cotton in Oklahoma, and we've talked before about my grandparents until they passed away being there, and